welcome to the Truth in the Arena podcast, where we're going to be looking to speak with coaches, athletes, and others in the performance field, talking about the ways that they've developed the principles and values that they bring to the field and that they speak about with their athletes in terms of training them for performance. But we're going to be shifting the field from the actual field of play to the political, the social, and that arena where we want to talk about how those same principles and values may influence the way and where you happen to plant your flag on the political landscape and in terms of current events and current issues. So happy to have our first guest today, longtime track coach, retired chemistry teacher, Tony Holler. You likely know him from his Feed the Cats ethos or maybe sprint-based football clinics. A well-known speaker and well-known influencer within the sports realm. Tony, thank you very much for joining us on this first podcast today.
Oh, this is going to be fun. Thank you.
It is going to be fun. So I'm looking forward to it. I'm excited about it. And one of the reasons that's motivated me to do this is that coaching is, for me, in and of itself, a nonpartisan but deeply political act where I am not looking to make money, because there are way easier ways to make money than being a coach. It's not an ego-driven thing. I don't need the wins and I don't need the gratitude. But what I do like to do is go out and have young female athletes on the field who I'm teaching about sportsmanship, who I'm teaching about competitive will, who I'm teaching about teamwork, being part of something bigger than themselves, being able to take agency over their own sports careers. And for many of them, instead of being specialized, they can play all the sports they want and to know that they have that ability. And so that's kind of where I come from as a coach. And I think many coaches have that same thing where they're driven by something bigger than just either the paycheck or the wins and losses. So can you talk a little bit about how your principles as a human being inspire your coaching, and what are some of the things that you wake up motivated to do every day across all realms that you bring to the coaching field? And then also within that, in your online personas, you've kind of split off your personal side from your coaching side, and talk a little bit about managing those two different sides of your personality, because they can sometimes come into conflict.
Yeah, my father was a coach for 47 years, and being his firstborn kid and all that kind of stuff, I became his wingman at a very young age. He took me everywhere. He never had money, never carried a wallet, but he was excited every damn day of his life, looking forward to the next thing, or the next practice, the next year, the next tournament, constantly excited. And I really believe I'm really focused recently on anchor bias, where the first thing we learn is what we grab onto. And there, before the grace of God, I grabbed onto a pretty good human being that really cared about doing these yearly journeys with a team. And the journey is full of ups and downs. It's full of emotion, which really makes it different than the chemistry classroom. And the higher level you do this at, the more special it seems. As a young coach, I was a head basketball coach and coached in front of packed gymnasiums and things. I won and lost. My dad was fired twice as a coach. I was fired once as a basketball coach. And so, you get this feeling like you're playing for keeps, but it's really not war either. Nobody's getting shot. Nobody's getting killed. And you're gathering together people that are different and trying to get them going in the same direction. And you have to have charisma and powers of persuasion, and you have to be articulate, and your message has to improve. And I really believe that in a perfect world, maybe coaches all graduate into politicians, because that's what politicians need to be doing. It needs to be this collectivism. We are going on this journey together, whether you're a state representative, and you have a couple little towns in Southern Illinois or something, or you're a state senator. All those things should be this feeling of excitement that we're going to get everybody going in the right direction for the collective good of all of us. Now, having said that, we win and lose. Sometimes we get fired. Sometimes things don't work out well, but coaches are really good at teaching those life lessons too. And I think that I wish that every kid got to go through sports And I wish that every kid got to go, or every kid grew into a coach someday, because I think it teaches so many things about parenthood, and we have to evolve. Oh my gosh, my dad evolved so much. I'll talk about that later. But that evolution, I think, is so important. And man, there's a lot of people that maybe they have that anchor bias towards some of the wrong ideals, and then they never evolve. It just becomes their identity. And by God, that's who I am.
And so, like, thinking of some of those things, like within, again, with your online persona, how do you try to merge those, or why is it necessary to keep those separate so that you're able to, when I'm talking about coaching, I'm talking about coaching. When I'm talking about Anthony Holler's interests, I'm talking about Anthony Holler's interests.
Yeah, and I hope it's not because I'm a coward. I don't see myself as a coward. But having said that, I've studied, I grew up, I was born in 1959, so I grew up immersed in the 60s. The assassinations of JFK, RFK, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X. I grew up, I was becoming more of an older kid, like a high school kid, during the Vietnam protests. And at that time, there were so many athletes, especially African-American athletes, who really spoke up, and it cost them dearly. We all know the Kaepernick story. Well, there were a lot of Kaepernicks in the 60s, and there's not many Kaepernicks now, because professional athletes know that there's this cash cow out there. And as soon as you get political, that stuff may go away. Now, anybody that knows me, I hope they know that I'm not money driven. I've been a school teacher all my life. My wife's a school teacher. Her dad was a teacher. My dad was a teacher. Two of my sons are teachers. We were paying off college loans instead of saving for our own kids' college education. So we have not come from that elite, Harvard set or anything. We are not generational wealth. We're more like generational poverty. Having said that, one of my goals, especially in the last 10 years, in this fourth quarter of my life, is that I want to change coaches' lives. With the Feed the Cats stuff, when we get testimonials about how it changes a coach's life, a team's life, they win more games, everything's great. And there's this group of us that kind of started it. And when we get something, we share it with each other, and we say we're changing the world one coach at a time. Now, I've also said at clinics that I'm not here to give you one or two things. I'm here to change your life. And that's a really bold, hyperbolic statement. But, my reach would be seriously reduced if I was putting out my political views on my coaching site. I hate to say it's pragmatic, because I criticize the hell out of Democrats for being pragmatic. Basically, that means just protecting your empire of money. But I'm not protecting my money. I'm protecting my ability to speak. And I really believe that I can get in front of 200 coaches, and they're probably 60% MAGA, and we'll talk about why in a minute. But I can come to common ground with those people. And they may see me as a Bernie Sanders socialist or something like that, but they'll still listen to my stuff because I'm not bombarding them on Twitter with my political viewpoints. Now, having said that, on my PN Track Twitter site, at the top, I said, follow my non-coaching interests at Anthony Holler. So I'm not hiding it. It is not like an anonymous account that I'm, like trolling MAGA people or something like that. But I have separated it. And at times I feel like I'm not doing enough, especially in these crazy times in our country, that I should be more like Bill Russell was in the 60s, more like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was back when he was Lou Alcindor. My dad, talking about my dad's evolution, and this is so important because not only did he model coaching, but he modeled evolving. I can remember I was only 9, but I think I was an old 9, an old soul. I was a nerdy person that listened to things and watched the news. And I remember how upset he was with Cassius Clay when he resisted the draft and would not go fight for our country. And then he became incensed with Tommy Smith and John Carlos when they protested at the 68 Olympics. I remember him yelling at the TV, "Send those guys home. They're not Americans." And it was weird because my dad played in the early 50s on an integrated team. 15 years before, the University of Kentucky had their first African-American basketball player. My dad, it was like half and half. And he loved those African-American athletes, but he didn't like protesting African-Americans, or he used to call it militant African-Americans. But from then, I believe that he died last year, and I believe if you asked him who were the absolute heroes that he knew that were African-American, he would name Tommy Smith, John Carlos, Cassius Clay, Bill Russell, Lou Alcindor, Jim Brown, these guys that spoke up. And at the time, he thought it was militant because that's just who he was. But he evolved into a better man who accepted and supported the plight of these athletes.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And it really kind of ties back into something that we talk about with our athletes in terms of just the basic protect, perform continuum, where, they need to feel like they're going to be safe sliding into second before they will slide into second. They need to feel like I can get stuck in on a tackle in soccer without breaking my leg before they'll really get stuck in on a tackle. And it's the same thing with our own beliefs, where as soon as you feel like, all right, I can express these things and I'm going to land on my feet and I'm not going to break my leg and I'm not going to hurt myself, then you get a little bit more. And that's kind of one of the things that we're hoping to talk about a little bit is, all right, the more use you get to expressing some of these things, then you can get a little bit outside of that needing to feel safe. But there's also a very practical side where I want to instill values in my players, but we come from a pretty upper middle class neighborhood. And if I'm telling them who they should be wanting to vote for or when they're 18 or who their parents should be voting for, well, we're going to come into conflict because obviously a lot of wealthy white people are still voting for Republicans over and over and over again. That's, if I get into that conflict, then I'm no longer able to reach those players the way that I want to reach them if I'm just speaking on a values level and on a principles level and on a way of like believing in each other and talking about sportsmanship. So I 100% get where you're coming from there. And then you had some very interesting things talking about, your father and how he was looking to take players on this yearly journey. And in your own Feed the Cats principles, there's some very energizing and galvanizing things in terms of, hey, we want to train the extreme to train the range. So we want to push the boundaries so we can bring everybody up with us. And we want this endless feedback loop where we're creating joy, and joy creates among the players, creates joy among the coaches, which creates enthusiasm, which creates motivation, which creates that wanting to come out every single day and having that motivation. So how do some of those things that we've just talked about here in terms of your Feed the Cats principles, how do those also translate into your perspectives on the political scene and the candidates that you find the most appealing?
Well, I've kind of half jokingly, but it's really not jokingly at all, have said at times when I speak that I'm the Bernie Sanders of track and field. And when I say that, people will think I'm a kook or something. But I think what it is, it's really the idea, the ultimate populism movement, where we are unifying people behind things that they should be unified about. I'm a huge believer in public schools, public roads. I'm a huge believer that we should have Medicare for all. That when Bernie Sanders says something like nobody should get cancer and have to file bankruptcy because of cancer, that is something that's really hard to say. I don't like that guy. I don't believe in that. If they haven't worked as hard as I have to get rich, they don't deserve to be able to pay for cancer treatments. So what I've tried to do is to unify my audience. And I will have like my 10 pillars of Feed the Cats, where I play Steve Earle, the revolution starts now. And there are things like kids are good at what they like and they're obsessed with what they love. And are you going to argue with that? Or the coach should make practice the best part of a kid's day because of that. because the more they like practice, the harder they'll practice, or that speed is the tide that lifts all boats. I mean, any coach says, no, I like slow guys, no, I've tried to make my audience say yes before I start talking about my particulars. And sometimes I say that feed the cats is more like a way to cook. And the recipe can really change. It can evolve from year to year. I'm not the same feed the cats coach I was 5 years ago or 10 years ago, but my pillars have not changed. And I think that is what I look for in a politician, is that, I want somebody that is true to their values, that are not asking consultants or think tanks or focus groups, what things should I be talking about? Which side of this issue should I hammer? And I think that we call these politicians pragmatic, but really what it is that they're making way too much money in politics, for them to take any risk. That basically what they want to do is to be elected every 2 years or every 6 years or every 4 years. And because of that, they are afraid to speak like Bernie speaks. And it's strange. I've heard people that I totally disagree with, Bill Maher, say that the far left and the far right are the same people. And it is, the far left and far right are really, really different. They're really different. However, there are similarities. I hate to say it, but one thing that people love about Trump is that he's a fighter. And he doesn't care what he says. It's like he's not going to ask some, think tank, like a focus group, which side of this issue should I be on? He's just going to pick the wrong side every damn time. Whereas Bernie is the same way. He's a fighter. Now, in my opinion, he picks the right side of every issue. And if he picks the wrong side, he will eventually evolve. I really criticized him on his support of Israel in the Gaza situation, but he evolved, and he went from being not defensive enough, of the genocide, to being at least to the point where we should no longer be sending 2,000-pound bombs to Israel until we have a say-so in how that war is engaged. So those things are important, and I just feel that like Feed the Cats is a bottom-up thing. It's I'm not some $6 million coach that's like picked to get in the Final Four in basketball, or I'm not coaching it. I don't know if any college track coaches are big deals, but I'm not coaching the University of Florida in track or anything like that. I'm Plainfield North High School. I mean, I am salt of the earth. I make $6,500 every spring coaching my track team, and it takes hundreds and hundreds of hours to do so. So I am a person of the people, which I think that's what Bernie is. Bernie is not somebody that, now he will be reelected because he's an independent that people love in Vermont. But I think that he would throw away his electability to stand on principle. And I hope that I would do the same thing. And I would hope that that's why coaches have given me the time of day and have read my stuff and have heard my talks and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, so many of the things that you've mentioned about Bernie Sanders are so common sense. Looking back at your own history that you've talked about, the fact that you're paying off student loans rather than saving for your own kids' colleges, that's ridiculous that people are in that situation where going to college becomes a generational debt. And obviously, having a major medical event should not put you into bankruptcy risk. And talking about all of the things that Bernie supports in terms of labor organization, and you should have these kinds of workplace protections, and you should be able to organize to create a living wage for you and your fellow employees. And all of these things are super, they're popular because the percentage of people who don't think that's a good idea is very small, and usually are doing so because it costs them money if those things happen. There's another side of it, and we've kind of touched a little bit in terms of where progressivism kind of runs aground with pragmatism. And there's both the kind of steady status quo of pragmatists among the Democratic institutionalists who who like the jobs they have, and they like the fact that they have a good income. And there's also, I think, a pragmatic element who don't truly believe that much can get done within the system. And they believe that all of these things that Bernie may talk about in terms of policies and what would be great aren't ever going to be legislatively possible, because they've seen Obama try to have common sense gun control measures that, 70% of Americans are like, yeah, that makes sense, and can't move it off the ground. So in terms of paths forward, what do you see as ways that kind of the more progressive arm of either the Democratic Party or Americans themselves, how do they push the pragmatists to believe that these things are possible, and it really just does take a certain amount of numbers to take what seemed legislatively impossible to, hey, now it is passed, like we can do it?
Well, I'm not real optimistic right now. I don't know if any Americans can be. I think there's big money in politics. I mean, we have people on the Supreme Court taking gifts of hundreds of thousands of dollars, which in any other time in our country's history, that Supreme Court justice would resign in shame.
Right.
But yet it's rubber stamped. And I don't even think Democrats are hitting them very hard, because like if you get to go to Congress and you string together a bunch of victories, and it seems like as long as the rich people don't get pissed at you, you'll just keep winning. You'll go in with $500,000 and come out with $50 million, and they're making less than a school superintendent, but yet they're going to leave with $50 million. It is just a racket of money right now. And so when we see one of my favorite books, The Nordic Theory of Everything, weird book about socialism in the Nordic countries, where kids can go to college relatively free. And if somebody has surgery, it doesn't set them back $20,000. And it's everybody. It's not just the people who have a good job. Like in our country, we should not be tying health insurance to your job. For one thing, that keeps you maybe at a bad job for a long time. I can't give up my health care. I can't start a new business because, man, this health care is, my dad worked from the age of 70 to 80 as a hall monitor at a high school so that they could have health insurance for he and my mom. That shouldn't happen, and so these countries, they have really good public transportation. They have really good public schools. They just have a lot of things that we should be dreaming of. And of course, the politicians say those are little countries, though. But you know what? England's not all that little. Everybody has their own mix of Medicare for all. But it is a safety net, not, so that people who don't work take our hard-earned money. But instead, it's stuff that we need, and stuff that the people of our country need. When FDR proposed Social Security, people said it was socialism. And today, Social Security would last forever if every single person paid the same percentage on every single dollar. But after $176,000, people pay zero into Social Security. So when Elon Musk is like wanting to shred Social Security, to fire half of their staff and all that kind of stuff, it's already takes an hour to talk to somebody at the place. In a month, it may be impossible to talk to a human. And if he would simply have paid Social Security on every dollar he earned, Social Security would be rich. And so we can do these things. But politicians didn't want Social Security. They also, FDR instituted FDIC. They didn't want that either. But, I think that our savings in banks should be guaranteed. That is just crazy that anybody would speak against that. But yet people do, because they've divided us. They've divided us on things like abortion for a long time. They are now dividing us in so many ways. Guns, they've divided us. They're dividing us on transgender. They act like all the Democrats care about transgender. I have all kinds of problems with Democrats, but I didn't hear Tim Walz or Harris, either one, talk about transgenders for like ever. That was not a part of what they were talking about. But if you only listen to Fox News, you will think that that's where Democrats plant their flag. So in other words, we've been divided by disinformation, intentional misinformation, which is lying. We've been divided by issues that really have nothing to do with public schools and Medicare for all, but it keeps us from getting anything done.
Yeah, and where I end up actually seeing optimism, and because I'm an optimistic person, and I like to see opportunity, and I like to see where things can happen. And when I see what outcomes I visualize over the next coming years, where people who used to value getting a free breakfast from a Head Start program, people who valued being able to call their Social Security Administration and speak to a human being, people who needed Medicaid, people who are on a retirement plan. So many people in those situations voted against their own self-interest and voted for Republicans who were going to take those things away because they didn't believe those things were ever going to get taken away. And that led to us being, as a country, in an untenable situation because we couldn't carry on with the way the two sides are completely divided. It's just that can't. What's happened over the last 15 years is no way to run a nation. And it reminds me a little bit of like being a parent of somebody with a gambling addiction. And if every time they lose, you give them the money for the bookie and they pay them off, and then they lose and then you pay them off and you keep feeding, then ultimately they can be a gambling addict forever and just kind of unhappy. But at some point, when you cut it off and they realize this is painful, this is not good, I need to stop that, then perhaps there's that populist decision that, hey, maybe we do need to vote for somebody who's going to protect our Medicare, and we do need to vote for somebody who's going to make sure that our Social Security savings are watched. And, oh, hey, we have kids. We do need to make sure that they have the ability to have a viable public education versus everything going to public school or private schools and all of those things. So from like that sort of maybe rose-colored glasses, maybe some of these things needed to happen in order to get through that crucible and maybe see some kind of regular change. One of the things that you've described also a little bit about some of propaganda and sort of the disinformation environment, and we really see it in the coaching realm, where when Donald Trump was having a particularly bad week, all of a sudden, all of the right-wing leaning propaganda outlets were suddenly all over transgender issues, or all over Easter and Obama's canceling Easter, and all of these sort of ways of turning people who have certain principles into foot soldiers in that propaganda war. In kind of the current information environment, like what is your media diet like? How do you vet good sources? How do you vet things that you think these are going to be true? Because as coaches, we have a pretty good idea of, all right, this thing this guy's doing over here is nuts. That won't work. But sometimes those same coaches who are very intuitive about how to, like, this has to be research-based, this has to be scientific, this has to work, will then see something that's very clearly from a propaganda or a misinformation kind of account and share it and be like, oh, well, maybe you didn't think that part through. So in terms of your media diet, do you have any suggestions for like having a healthy media diet as a coach?
Yeah, don't watch Fox News. But other than that, no, I think you're really onto something here. I think coaches, they're not dumb. Coaches are some of the smartest, most driven people I know. And so what happens is they're able to see the difference between a fraud and somebody who's real when it comes to coaching stuff. I know Michael Boyle talks about, like follow people that are actually doing the work. Don't follow people that are sitting in their office just typing stuff up. Go visit people doing their work. Read people who are doing the work. And I think coaches are really good at that. They They sense fraudulent stuff really, really quick. But then it comes to the news, and there is no such thing as good local news anymore. None. And there's no national news worth watching. I think the three networks have just fallen apart. I mentioned Fox News and Newsmax. They're like state TV. They are paid arms of the government. Trump has, like half of his cabinet worked at Fox. Hannity is like an advisor to him. So all that stuff is going on. But as a teenager, I read the Chicago Tribune every day, and not just the sport page. I read it all. And I don't think newspapers are very good anymore. Don't judge me, but I have MSNBC on almost all day. It's in the background. I'm doing other things and stuff. And about 1/10 of MSNBC has really bright, non-political consultant people who come on and really give you good stuff. Really, really good stuff. My BS meter gets turned off, and I'm like, yes, I like that. And I like Chris Hayes at 7 o'clock because he has a lot of those types of guests. I don't feel like Chris Hayes is a propaganda wing of the Democratic Party. Having said that, I think that over 50% of MSNBC are former Republicans who, like the old Chamber of Commerce Republicans like Joe Scarborough, who, just came from wealth and they kind of believed in, the flag and a strong military and low taxes. They're like these Reagan Republicans who are gone now. They are totally gone. It's just, to be a Republican is to wear a red hat now. And it's totally different. So what I'm saying is it's hard. It's really hard. You have to work so hard to find anything that's true on TV. I do think that there are books, and I don't know where I'd be without the books I've read. I've probably read over 1,000 books in my life, and probably 90-some% of those books are not sports related. But, when I read Nixonland, a story by Pearlstein, a story of the 60s, it made so much sense to me. When I read Death of a King about Martin Luther King, when he was shot, he had an approval rating of 26%. And now he's like the god among African Americans. His approval rating was 26%. And now he's like this Jesus Christ figure among African Americans. When I read Fantasyland by Kurt Anderson, when I read The Demon Haunted World by Sagan, it is, oh my goodness, you have it. Fantasyland really speaks to why we have a tendency to want to believe crazy shit. So even a book, I'll shout out to a really good friend of mine that's an author. He just wrote a book called Big Time, which is a fabulous sports book about a university in Colorado renaming itself Coors University. But the $2 billion they got had to go to only football, men's football and men's basketball. And you say, well, that's a crazy, well, it's kind of happening. But anyway, he wrote a book called 40 Minutes of Hell about Nolan Richardson. And it was going to be about Nolan Richardson, but it ended up being one of the best civil rights book I've ever read. And it's really hard to read books like that, even if you had a 5-year Rush Limbaugh habit, which I did. It's really hard to read those kinds of books without understanding a little bit more about the way things are really working. And I was going to tell you before I forget, the reason why most coaches are MAGA is because in the education world, teachers are pragmatic and soft, and administrators are pragmatic and soft, and their opinion will go back and forth with the wind because administrators are making twice as much as teachers are making, and they're further away from kids. And so they want to keep their jobs. So coaches are like these tough guys, like these guys that we have to make decisions, and we can't just have a terrible school and think nobody will notice it. If we do a terrible job, we're going to lose. And so we have this kind of fighting spirit that other people in education don't have. And so we tend to latch on to politicians that are fighters who have strong opinions. And, I latched on to Bernie. I have a son that's kind of latched on the other way.
No, definitely. I mean, for all of us who are in the coaching realm, we know that, coaching is an arena of the heart, and you get into a room full of coaches and very quickly you're taking the measure of each one and like that guy. Ooh. And it is an area where you have to know that, look, if I'm in a room full of hard guys or hard women, that you have to be prepared to stand your ground and you have to be ready to hold on to the things that you believe. And so then, because the Republican Party has managed to, over the years, brand itself more as the land of the hard and try to present Democrats as the land of the soft, that is part of the branding for both of them. And one of the, as we talk about optimism in the world moving forward, one of the things that's interesting is you've talked about your 5-year brush with right-wing radio, and in a speech that you gave last year before the election, you mentioned that your worst human instincts were put to rest because of the books that you read. And so there is that progression. Can you just briefly talk a little bit about what, like, that mindset, how that switch happened in your own mind? Because again, if somebody can go from being a right-wing radio fan to a Bernie supporter, then really anything's possible for anybody.
Yes. And I think that, I'll go back to watching my dad not cling to an identity that he had created when he was 25, but instead be willing to evolve and say I was wrong back then, I think really gave me the freedom to evolve. I mentioned my son, I hope my son evolves. I've told him, I said, I went through a bad phase too. When I was stupid, he didn't like that. But yeah. And I have said on Twitter a couple times when people are saying, God chose Trump for us, a guy that I really love, everything about his coaching I love, I responded one word, evolve. And he probably hates me now. But I think that's really important, that we accept the fact that we can be wrong. One of the reasons why I turned right wing actually was partly because of books. I read like 7 straight Tom Clancy books that are like very conservative, very militaristic, very, like he was a tough guy. He would, and he made fun of soft politicians that had no backbone, no spine. And so I wanted to be, I'm a coach. That's who I want to be. And then this is really interesting too. I had a really, really good friend that is a Hall of Fame coach. And he was, I hate to say it, but he spoke like a racist. He spoke like a homophobe. It was really pretty bad, like very Rush Limbaugh, blah, 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 right wing, everything. But here's something we have to remember about those people. He was a good man. He's a good dad. He was good to animals. The African-American kids that played for him loved him, and he loved them. What I have found is so many of these people that I really disagree with, who say kids these days, they're all entitled, cell phone, they're a bunch of, and I'll wait a little bit. Tell me about your kids. And they love their kids. They think their kids are brilliant. It's just the other kids are bad. And then they'll start talking about public schools today are a mess. My wife and I were on a Viking cruise in Europe, and we're at a table where these older people, everybody's old on a Viking cruise, but they're all talking about how public schools are just drugs, guns. People getting raped in the hallway. It is just us, and I'm like, we're public school teachers, and they were, but how do you do it? It's so awful. But oftentimes they're proud of their own public school. It's like, wait a minute, how can both things be true? And what it is this disinformation that is clouding. When I say I'm not in Chicago, but I'm outside of Chicago. I feel like I'm from Chicago. And they go, how can you live there? Aren't you afraid you're going to get shot? I'm like, it's really a good town, man. It's really a good town. And I know there's shootings. There was a shooting last night in a liquor store. Like 4 people got shot. But, it was in a bad neighborhood at a bad time of night. And my mom used to say, like if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, you're going to get shot or something. And I think she was right. But the fact is, we are so colored by the information we digest. And man, I wish we could just, realize that we're being lied to in order to divide us. And I guess really bad stuff sells too. Like people like tune in when they hear about those shootings at a liquor store, but the act of kindness of a neighbor to an 80-year-old man next door, that's not really on the news.
Yeah, no, I mean, we mentioned Fantasyland, and it's interesting the way that, like, the history of believing that there is something terrible out there. And if you in the 1800s, if you wanted to make money as a preacher, the way to do it was to sell that the end was coming. And, well, it didn't come 2 years from now when I'd said it. Well, it's actually coming 4 years from now. And, like, that kind of message of doom makes a sort of sense of the world to some people. And kind of to sort of wrap things up in terms of ways to kind of make sense of the world, you had mentioned that at a Bernie Sanders rally, you'd given a speech relating to the topic that progressivism is patriotic. And one of the ways that there's a divide in the country today is between those who believe progressivism and patriotic. There's nothing more patriotic than wanting basic rights for everybody and wanting to evolve and wanting to move forward. And then there's another completely different view of patriotism where there is this era that I may think was idealized and never even truly existed, but there is still this 4th of July vision of is America, and we just need to find a way to get back to that. And that is what patriotism is. Can you talk just a little bit to wrap up in terms of why you think progressivism is patriotic and how maybe there is an evolution that looks at both incorporating some of those views of what was valuable in the past, adding those to what is progressive now, and then continuing to move forward again as either coaches in the field or as a country on the whole?
Well, I hope, and I think history has shown that this happens, where the pendulum, if it swings too far, will swing back rather quickly. And I hope that happens. I think that, one of the greatest moments of our country's history was the election of Barack Obama, one of the most talented politicians in the history of our country. I was really disappointed with almost everything from his administration. I guess I bought into the hope a little bit too much, but the pendulum swung way back the other direction. You could say that I was not a Hillary Clinton fan at all, but I think that running a woman for president was very progressive, and I think it caused a backlash. And I really believe that hopefully it will swing the other way. It's really sad that when I see a flag in a Twitter bio, I immediately assume they're MAGA. That they are mean, anti-immigrant, they're anti-woman, anti-black. They've co-opted religion for their favor for a small group. They think their religion's really good, but they want to deport Muslims or something. And that's what I think of. And so I hope that progressivism can regain that patriotic ground. In my speech I gave the night before Bernie got slaughtered in South Carolina, and all the Democrats came to make sure that Joe Biden was the next president. I talked about when we were fighting the Nazis, and there were wounded Nazi soldiers on the battleground, that we didn't ask them if they could pay for their medical needs. We didn't ask, do you have insurance? We saved them. We saved them because, damn it, we were Americans. And you could say, oh, that's so progressive. We should have put a bullet right in their head. That's not who we are. That's not who we were. That when I grew up, when I thought about patriotism, I thought about good people that helped people, that fought for people that had less than them, fought for people that were hurt, sick, those things. And it's weird that not only have MAGA co-opted patriotism, but also that religion thing, because I'm not a very religious guy, but I think Jesus would never have said put another bullet in his head. I think he would have said, save this guy, save this guy. And so that's my hope. And after talking to you, I feel kind of embarrassed or ashamed that I have not spoken more on this stuff, because I have a pretty big reach and it needs to be talked about.
Well, I don't think you could say anything better to kind of close things out than "damn it, we're Americans." I mean, that's just it's a simple, like, we should have that belief that that means something, and it means we're on the side of good, and that's part of who you want to have as part of your value. And then in terms of the conversation itself, this has not been something without risk, and like we talked about, like it's not the easiest conversation to have, it's not the easiest conversation to promote, but as you reflect on it and look back on it, there's nothing outside of going back to talking about all these things that like Bernie Sanders believes in that are hard to argue with. These are all very basic principles that for almost anybody who's listening from the coaching side wouldn't say, well, why would you say that? Why would you believe those things? Because these are common sense values, common sense principles, and ways that you could get back to that entire evolution of, damn it, we're Americans. Let's figure these things out together, because we do have all of this common ground.
And the very last thing, when you have to look at social media, people can be mean as hell on social media. I mean, they can be nasty, as we've both seen. When you sit down with somebody face to face at breakfast, everything changes.
Right.
You start looking for common ground. And so maybe it's the fact that we don't sit and talk to each other enough. And when we do talk, we talk about sports instead of things that matter. And so, yeah, here I'm a coach and I love to talk sports, but maybe we need to talk more to remind each other that damn it, we're all Americans.
Yeah, no, I mean, very, very important point there, that over the course of a conversation, if you're going to sit through a meal with somebody, you cannot be arguing the entire time. And you can argue with somebody on social media for a moment, leave it, forget it, let it fester, go back, argue with them for a moment, leave it, let it fester, go back. And that's no way to live. And if you are, again, living your principles and touching grass and speaking to people and being like truly rolling up your sleeves and in the game, and then like you mentioned to your father's mission of being able to take people from all different backgrounds with all different belief systems and all different racial heritage and all of that, and put them all on the same page, take them all on the same journey, you can go places. So, Tony, thank you very much for taking the time today to kick off this first episode, and I'm really looking forward to seeing where we go from here.
I can't wait. Thank you so much, Nathan.